you go. Just kidding. Hi, I'm Brian Walsh with the Center for Technology Commercialization, CTC, and I'm talking with Paige Peters, founder and CEO of a Milwaukee-based startup called Rapid Radicals. Today, we're going to focus mainly on the role collaborations and partnerships have had so far in her company's journey. So, Paige, um, tell us, let's start by telling us a little bit about your background and about Rapid Radicals.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me, Brian. So my name is Paige Peters. I'm the CEO and founder of Rapid Radicals, and I'm also a PhD student in civil environmental engineering at Marquette University, which is very crucial to how this whole story and journey began. My background is civil environmental engineering. Actually, got my bachelor's in civil environmental at Marquette. Um, 10 years ago, and went into the working world for a while. Came back to Marquette to do my master's, specifically for the project that would end up leading to be Rapid Radicals treatment system. And so I founded Rapid Radicals. I started my master's at Marquette in 2015 in civil environmental engineering,
So
and
let me
I
stop just a second.
uh,
So you said specifically to do the project. So did you know at the time, or I mean, so you knew at the time that that was the direction you were going when you joined, or it was specifically for that project, and then you ended up moving forward with the company, the SBI.
Yes, the so I started grad school in 2015, and we didn't. I founded the company in 2016 when when I kind of got the proof of concept for what we were looking for. I'll back up a little bit and explain that. So when I was working at the time, and it was kind of one of these serendipitous moments where I was working on a project for my company at the time, a consulting firm that was using Marquette resources, or I had worked with Marquette to do some sampling. So the project I was working on, I dropped the samples off myself. And my advisor, Dan Zittimer, was my undergraduate advisor and still my advisor, had called me into his office, and I had that moment of like, I'm not supposed to be nervous for you calling me into your office like I was when I was maybe in undergrad, because but I had that same feeling. He called me into his office and started telling me about this project that he had gotten, or that he had just written a proposal for, which is with the Industry University Cooperative Research Center that we have in Milwaukee, which is focused on water equipment and policy and is co-funded by the National Science Foundation. So this project was this high rate wet weather treatment project. I really didn't know a whole lot about the specific types of technologies or treatments, but I knew that my kind of vocation has always been in water related work, and um, especially water engineering and supply of clean water. And so it sounded like a fantastic project for me to pivot from the working world back into graduate school. So I started grad school at Marquette in 2015, working on the first year of this project, and we were funded again through that same center in 2016. And after doing some testing and kind of setting these parameters with our industry partners, who were through this center, which included the Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewage District, New Water, Green Bay, Chicago Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, and Fond du Lac. Uh, we set these parameters for what would be considered successful for this technology. And that ended up being this kind of 30-minute detention time, which, again, to back up a little bit, with wastewater treatment, you're conveying all this wastewater to a centralized location, and the treatment takes between 8 to 14 hours. And so the target for our treatment that we've been working on was looking at how do we deal with these wet weather events that occur. They're, with climate change, they're becoming more intense, more frequent, less predictable. And so we have this aging infrastructure. In Milwaukee, we have a combined sewer system. So you have sanitary sewage and stormwater running in the same pipe. And when when these storms hit, the systems become overburdened, and you cannot convey water fast enough to a treatment plant. So those infrastructure failures result in combined sewer overflows or sanitary sewer overflows, where you have untreated discharges, untreated sewage going into lakes and rivers, or basement backups, where contaminated water floods the basements of residential and commercial basements. Both of those are environmental and public health issues. So we've been working with those utility partners on how do we develop a technology that can be used during those intense storm events at the location where you see those overflows occurring, to prevent them from ever happening, by way of treating them real time. And so we meet those permit requirements. And in order to really meet those, to meet those permit requirements and to be helpful and successful and really meet the need of our customer, of our industry partners at the time, we need to be looking at a low detention time, like a rapid treatment time. And 30 minutes was what we settled on for what would give us a really small footprint. So it would allow us to implement this technology wherever we needed to in the treatment plant or in the watershed, and give us a small footprint and a small capital cost. So when we hit that 30-minute detention time after a year and a half of research, I remember the call specifically. It was with one of our industry partners at the time. We were giving them an update on the research, and my advisor and I looked at each other, and he was like, "I think you should start a company." And I had absolutely no idea what that meant. Like, to me, that was like, I it was a speechless moment because I had absolutely no idea how to go forward with that. But it sounded really exciting, and I knew that the only way we would transfer this technology is if I started looking at it from kind of that formalized perspective. Let's start the company and start seeing what that track looks like, because academia and entrepreneurship don't overlap that much and often conflict in their priorities. So I thought the only way we're going to see this technology get implemented is if we give it that space.
Okay, so your frame of mind was sounds like nervous and excited
Mm-hmm.
when it started. And when we
I love
talk,
a good challenge, even though it was foreign to me.
yeah, that's a good thing to that's a good way to go into it. And when we were talking the other day, you said at the beginning phases when you kind of just did that, you all of a sudden were wondering like who's on my side, um, you know, where you were working, where at the institution. What maybe share a little bit about that thinking.
Sure. So that's kind of, as I just mentioned, entrepreneurship and academia. They, we both want to see things happen. There's inventors in both spaces. It's always exciting. It's always changing, but they move at very different paces. And that's not just by nature, but that's almost by expectation. So as an entrepreneur, you're expected to move quickly. Even though for us, no matter what, we work in the municipal space, we're going to have a long sales cycle. Things happen more slowly. So that kind of caters well to being in the entrepreneurial space, working in academia also, because academia moves much more slowly. Things take time, they must be validated. There's just these different expectations. And so I struggled for the first, I'd say probably at least the first year, just to figure out how to manage those different expectations and manage at times the conflicting advice I would get. And so I the very first thing I did when I started the company was reach out to market resources. We've got the Loan Entrepreneurship Clinic that helped me found the company and work through some of that paperwork and start developing some of the agreements that I would eventually need. I reached out to the Kohler Center for Entrepreneurship and the 707 Hub at Marquette, and they've been incredibly helpful with mentorship and just like at times handholding, at other times just feet to the fire. And so knowing that I had that support was really helpful. But then getting to the point of at some point we have to keep moving forward, and if I'm not keeping both of these frames of mind in my perspective, one of them's going to fall off. Um, so some of the best advice I ended up getting was that I just needed to trust myself. And therefore, being a noob to all this, I didn't know how to have that instinct and that gut, but I knew what felt right. And I knew at the end of the day, open lines of communication was important. If I didn't feel like I could meet both expectations, I needed to be able to talk about that with someone, or I need to at least be able to feel comfortable admitting to myself that I didn't know what I was doing. Or that and I because I always felt like no matter what, as long as I could have those conversations like with my advisor, other people at Marquette, when things would happen with the company, or reach out to some of my my mentors at the company, if I felt like the direction things were headed on from an academic perspective were not going to line up with what I wanted the timeline for the company to be, if I could at least have those conversations, then there wouldn't be any surprises. And I think that's probably a lesson for all aspects of life, but it just really came to the forefront for me, because my biggest fear in all this was that I would do something without realizing it that would ruin both opportunities.
And then at that point, did you negotiate an agreement regarding intellectual property with the university? Had that been worked out before?
It was a slower process because this is still kind of new for Marquette. Um, from the standpoint of having a student who's still a student, developing a technology, transferring it while still a student, and now we've gotten outside funding through a National Science Foundation STTR program. So there's a lot of, as well as having some of our first funding come from this industry university cooperative research center, where one of the the pros of it is that the industry members get first right of refusal to any intellectual property. So that we're not the I think we were the first startup to come out of work, not the first startup to work with the IP of the center, but the first startup to be developed from IP from the center. So it just got confusing. And so we're still working out that relationship. We went through the process of filing an invention disclosure. We filed a patent, Marquette filed a patent in February. So this is when I say we, I know things always get confusing because sometimes I have to even remember when the timeline of the research started versus the company and what those efforts are separately. But we worked out a cooperative research agreement in order to go through the due diligence phase of getting the STTR, and then by the end of the summer, our goal is to kind of work through, or early fall, to work through what a full licensing agreement will look like. But because it's been kind of a slow process, which in this sense has been fine because we're just now getting to these big milestones for licensing, it's given us a chance to have some really open, honest conversations. And going back on that previous theme of communication has been great for me because I just want to feel like we have all of our ducks in a row. So the fact that we can move slower to make sure we're capturing all these conversations and all these perspectives has been really good.
Well, you kind of talked about a little bit about, I'll use the term loosely, past partnerships, past collaborations, things that kind of helped you get helped you get going. And as I mentioned before, I kind of want to focus a little bit on collaborations and partnerships in this discussion. And so we talked a little bit about past. Were there any other key milestones that got you to where kind of to the current, and how did partners or collaborators help you get there? And then we'll kind of go into right now where you're at, what's the importance of partnerships and where you're at right now.
Yeah, the partnership aspect is really key to me and to the company. I think and this is one thing that we had talked about that I really want to emphasize is that as we built the company, that kind of forming relationships, honoring the commitments that those relationships make to each other is a cornerstone of our company. And that goes back to the communication side. And it goes back to the fact that what we're trying to do takes a lot of people. We're not creating, and this is not to say that a small widget doesn't take a lot of people, but we're trying to kind of change the way an industry sees and in something that impacts everybody in a city. And so, what we're doing when we're working with our partners, we're also working for their stakeholders. And so, our key partnership has really been working with the Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewerage District. And that goes all the way back to the beginning because they were an original industry mentor from that funding with Marquette. So, that partnership for Rapid Radicals really started with Marquette. And then, as we looked at, we went through these as a graduate student at Marquette, I went through these 2 years of research on the technology for the core technology. And then when we started the company and I started thinking about what this is going to look like once we move forward with it, it became about formalizing those relationships. So the first, I guess, 4 industry mentors that we had were potential customers. They were all utilities that would be potential customers. And starting the company meant that I could start talking to them a little bit more like they were customers because they're still mentors and they're potentially customers. That makes that key partnership happen because it's mutually beneficial. Um, and so as we went from the bench scale and the lab scale work to start looking at how is this going to scale and how are we going to do a pilot version of this while keeping the company in mind, because the only way this is going to have a commercialization perspective and therefore a technology transfer perspective is if the company stays involved. So the first funding that we received as a Marquette graduate student was with the Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewage District to build this pilot. But but Rapid Radicals was involved on it to essentially guide the commercialization side of it. And then when we were able to use that funding to leverage the STTR funding so that we can keep doing the commercialization side of things, that's where those two circles of academia and entrepreneurship have actually started really complementing each other, because we can do the fundamental science work that we need to. That's really what what the district wants to see. In addition, because of the background with the industry partnerships and the industry cooperative research center, as well as looking at the commercialization and performance metrics. And so when we know that we're providing a service because we're validating a technology that's going to be incredibly valuable here in Milwaukee, and then we can make sure that we're doing a good job by having that partnership and having that communication with the district, so that relationship maintains high, I guess you could say, high efficacy. It remains really efficient, so that we can keep checking to make sure that we're doing what's going to make the project successful. One metric of success of the project being that MMSD is pleased and happy with what we're doing, and knowing that we're kind of using the district obviously as a surrogate for the other over 800 combined sewer cities in the country, not counting the rest of the world. And so as we started thinking about how we're going to grow, the getting the pilot was a huge milestone. Obviously, the STTR was a huge milestone. And as we think about moving forward, this is where there's that push pull of moving really quickly in entrepreneurship that I've benefited from being able to slow it down, because we're working in a slow moving and more risk averse industry. Is that we can really make sure that whatever we do, we honor the relationship with the district first. They were, the I guess you could say they put an investment into the pilot, and they have an interest in improving water quality in the city. And so anything that we do from here on, it has to first and foremost be about honoring that relationship and honoring that partnership, and making sure that it maintains its mutual beneficial status. And so as we look forward, whatever we do next can't move too quickly without making sure that we've really solidified this and really celebrated the advocacy that we've received. And so that's something I feel really, really passionate about, and I'm really grateful for that partnership. And the fact that we've continued to receive, we being the company, received support from Marquette, and have been able to keep everybody happy, even if it's not always easy, but knowing that that's what we have to do.
So when you entered into that, I know that came along even back, in the early days. But when you entered that partnership, did you have any doubts or worries about working with MMSD? Any things that were kind of keeping you awake as you moved forward into that relationship?
That it wasn't going to work, not the
Yeah.
partnership, but the technology. I mean, I knew that I've done all the research, and I know that it works, and I know that it's scalable. I feel confident in that. It's our job to show that. But I think, that's just easily something that keeps you awake at night, that something could go wrong, that something that you thought you knew wasn't true, all those doubts creep in. But I think, and so I guess really it was just, I really respected that relationship so much, and I just really wanted to do right by it. Um, and if something goes wrong with the tech, that's numbers, that's science. We can improve it, we can change it, we can always make it better. But making sure that we were being open and honest and upfront. And I think my biggest fear, because I'm only one person, and I wear a lot of hats in this company and in this project and this research, that I would move too quickly, and I would get too narrow minded, and I would forget something, or um, I would forget to tell someone something, or that. Those are really like, right before I go to bed, I start thinking like, okay, here are the things I'm worried about. Did I tell, okay, I really should let them know this. And we've always been met with, thank you for letting me know. I appreciate that you're being upfront about this. And, um, so there's some aspects of the worry and the doubt that are just logistics. And one thing that I've been trying to do as we've grown and as we've moved forward is to always be looking enough ahead that we're not surprised if something changes. So it's that balance of just keeping enough perspective on the future that we can plan for it, even if it doesn't necessarily look like the way we want it to, which fortunately isn't the case right now, while maintaining, like, okay, are we in it? Are we being present right now? Are we in it right now? Are we, do we have our eyes open right now?
So kind of playing off the communication part and maintaining a relationship with that partners in general, are you building in some sort of structure to your communication with them? Is there some kind of routine? Or how are you and your team making sure you're proactive in communicating?
We tried to, I tried to, especially through, I'd say through COVID times, we were really grateful to still be able to go visit the site and continue working on our pilot, which is located at one of MMSD's treatment plants, because we work in our pilot, which is a trailer, and we're in isolation. So that was one thing that we try to keep open communication about what days we would be there, if anything would change. As things develop in the company, I want to make sure that, since MMSD always has kind of that first perspective, or first, at this point, it's not really, like I said, right or refusal. It's just more making sure that, again, we're doing right by that relationship. So making sure we're moving in a direction that is consistent with the work that they've already done and contributed for us. So staying in line with their mission. But otherwise, it's really monthly updates. If things change or come up, trying to talk about them right away. So we haven't really built as much of a structure in regular communication as we do, just giving updates as things come up and things change. But you know what, Brian? That's a really good piece of advice.
I mean, a piece of advice in the form of a question. That's the best way. So when we were talking before, you mentioned that you anticipate needing another significant partnership, or hoping for one, as you try and bridge the gap to a full-scale commercial implementation. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So the next big thing we're hoping to do is apply for phase two SBIR with National Science Foundation later this year. And I guess outside of the phase two, we know that the next step is a larger pilot, or a pilot that gives us more exposure. So we have great exposure with the district. They're considered an extremely progressive utility, so they're looked at from utilities all over the world. So we already have this great exposure in the advocacy that we have, that they give us, and the technology. But the next step, really, from a data perspective, is a different location or a larger pilot. And so as we start looking at what the next step is for the pilot here in Milwaukee, I think we want to keep working. We have probably at least another year, if not two, working on this pilot in its current location. Then we might move it so we can be able to keep that relationship with the district. As we look to a next partnership, what we've really seen is the Great Lakes community. There's over 800 combined sewer cities in the country, and there's 184 just in the Great Lakes region. And many of those cities, you can you can consider Milwaukee kind of a surrogate for some of the same issues that they're having, some of the same culture perspectives too, which we've also noticed that, our potential customer, our customer archetype, isn't just a utility with so many people who have combined sewers. It also has to have some sort of progressive culture that wants to see innovation happen and wants to be a part of the innovation journey. And so as we look for a next pilot, we've been able to as a next pilot location, and therefore another partnership, we've been able to identify a couple other cities that see technology development and innovation similarly. And so as we continue building that next partnership, again, it's not just we want a site to put down another trailer and do another pilot. It's about building that relationship. So are they progressive and they want to see this technology scale, grow, and want to be part of that experience, about that journey, and contributing to saying, what data do you want to see that's going to help you transfer this, or convert this from a demonstration site to a full scale? And additionally, can you help us continue spreading the word, and potentially get another partnership or another site? So that next partnership is not just a pilot site, it's also building another relationship. And that's really what we're looking for the next phase. And the phase two will cover a lot of that work, looking for that next partnership, that next location.
Can you envision a dream partnership that'll take you to the across the finish line? That'll you know, whether it's a specific partner, a specific type of a partner that'll take you to that final commercial installation implementation.
Oh, I like that question.
It wasn't in the
I
script.
think, ooh, juicy. I the first thing the first thing I thought of was the EPA. So what we need right now is for the EPA to be like, this is the best thing you could possibly do, um, to its utilities, which would never necessarily happen. But I think the I think a dream partnership is probably one that still stays within I wouldn't say necessarily a specific utility, because the next utility is going to be a pilot. It's just where we're at with the data. We know that we're going to need a little bit of time to get a little bit more data to expect anything like a full scale implementation. um, Honestly, I think the next dream partnership would be a collaborative pilot, and so we could work with organizations like the Water Environment Federation that helps provide some more collaborative, provide some funding for collaborative research activities and pilots, so that we could do a Great Lakes focused pilot or demonstration site that would be bigger, because it would be either serving more than one community. So maybe it's a pilot that's actually designed to be mobile, so that, which is one of our big applications, is eventually a mobile unit that we could have now and go between communities to test different types of wastewater. We would be getting all that input and all that data that we know would be valuable to the customers, because those customers are who we're in partnership with and who we're collaborating with. And that gives us that nationwide, if not international, exposure. So that would be a dream partnership, and that's something that we've already started talking about with our current partners. Is what really what that would look like, who'd be involved in it, and then there's a lot of logistics to go from there. But I think it's kind of more than one bird with one pilot, to avoid the stone analogy, but that would just give us the kind of that. I think that would capture our vision really well, is that we want to start building relationships and being more recognized. And we know that realistically, it's the input from consultants and other manufacturers that really help you move forward. And so getting more data, getting that exposure, and serving the Great Lakes region would meet our vision really well for the future.
So I've sprinkled it. I have sprinkled in a few questions from the chat box along the way, but let's kind of go before I get asked for your closing thoughts. Let's go. Let's take a look at what's in here. So let's see if we talked about IP. Um, so how did you push through it along the way? How did you push through all the unknowns and the fear of missing something? What tactics did you use?
Um, I talked about it a lot to anybody who would listen, and at the time that fell mostly on my then girlfriend, now wife. So if we're going to talk about partnerships in this, I think that is a pretty key partnership that has helped a lot throughout this whole process. Um, but I felt like that helped me more than anything, was if I could just talk about it, whether it was to my advisor or to the mentors, and to the folks at the 707 hub, to my wife, to my family. It just helped me feel like I wasn't missing something, and I wasn't going crazy, and that I had more help than I realized. Because sometimes that's all you need, is to just be able to talk about it, to make sure you're not missing something. And I knew that, again, we were moving at a pace. And at the beginning, the funding was through Marquette. And so it wasn't as much risk on the company, that we could move at a slower pace to make sure we weren't missing things. And I think that helps a lot. I know that's not that's not the same case with everyone. We've been able to have longer grant cycles and longer research uh, like research timelines to give us that time to make sure we're not missing stuff. But I'd say that's probably the biggest thing. I'm a talker as is, and so I just try to keep talking it out to make sure that I'm not missing something. And if I'm really worried about something, um, just reaching out to whoever it is that could help quell that, or could answer that question for me. So there's a lot of conversations with my advisor to get us to this point. Yeah,
So proactive communication is a common theme. Like,
yeah,
um,
absolutely. And there's a lot of times where you just don't want to say anything because you feel like maybe you already made a mistake. And if you talk about it, then you admit it. But the only way to deal with it is to talk about it. So there's a lot of humility that has come in this process.
Now that's a good insight observation. So with an STTR, was there a requirement with the university that university professor not have a financial stake in the company? And was there a snag or problem that needed to be ironed out from the university to allow you as a student to get and fund university work through the STTR?
No, so I'm the PI on the STTR. My advisor is has no financial stake in it, so I'm 100% owner of the company. When I founded the company, we talked about like what that would really look like, and he felt that with everything that was already on his plate and what we knew, I didn't quite know, but what we kind of figured this would all entail and how much work it would be going forward. If it was going to happen, it would have to be something I felt comfortable doing, at least from the company development on my own. He remains as obviously a lead technical advisor, but there's no financial stake from his perspective. And so when we developed the STTR and we developed the objectives, we made sure that everything that we stated was very clearly different than funding that we're already receiving, which is obviously a huge a huge part of the due diligence phase with the STTR, anyways. But knowing that because I'm still a student, um, and I'm still affiliated with Marquette, and Marquette was the collaborative university. We knew that there were some lines that we really needed to draw and keep very clear ahead of time to avoid any issues going forward. So we haven't had any issues with that. But again, I'll go back to that communication thing where it was a huge fear of mine. And so we talked about it a lot as I was writing the proposal to make sure that that was never going to be an issue that we had. And that was one of those things where it would keep me awake at night that I would miss something and it would end up being a mistake that would cost us a lot. So I just talked about it a lot to make sure that, because a lot of it comes down to my willingness to admit that I don't know something, which, again, in this process and starting the company and especially applying for these, that was my first National Science Foundation grant that I'm the PI on. So there's a lot of uncertainty for myself, and Marquette was great to work with to walk me through a lot of that and make sure that I was keeping lines very clear.
How do you, what advice would you give to students who want to make a jump like this? Um, yeah.
Um, well, it's a I don't know that jump is the right word because I'm constantly going back and forth. Maybe it's like a hopscotch that's in a circle because I wear both hats on a regular basis. Um, and it's a lot of, and I joke often, I mean, I do this a lot when I have meetings so that I feel like I'm having, when I say we, or I say me as graduate student, me as CEO, I can feel like I have that distinction. So I joke a lot about getting like actual hats that are like me as Marquette, me as Rapid Radicals, um, because it's constantly going back and forth. And like I said previously, those priorities sometimes conflict. And so if you're juggling both, you need to be able to keep both of those in mind. And at some point, when I started writing proposals, I wrote them to be like, well, is this going to benefit what we're doing academically as well as from a commercialization standpoint? And, you have to step back and still look at the scientific method to make sure that what the data that you're getting from an academic perspective is still highly valuable. And if you can marry that with the commercialization metrics for success, that's a huge win-win. And so for making that leap, for me, the biggest value that it had was that I really believe in what we're doing. And I know there's nothing like this right now. And from the 200 customer discovery interviews we've done, we know that it's needed. And I
Good,
know
good
that
way to
this
drop
was,
that in there. Thank you.
yeah, you're welcome. I was never, it was, no one else was going to do this. No one else was going to take this technology and transfer it to the market. And so if I really wanted it to happen, so I guess the piece of advice is if you want it, you have to go get it and know that you have allies along the way. So finding who's on your side, identifying if someone's not, or identifying if there's something you can do to improve that relationship, or or if not, cutting it out and working on, on the ones that are really being good for you. But at the end of the day, you have to want it because no one else is going to say you need to do this. This was a choice that I made, and I'm incredibly grateful for it, that the opportunity existed for me to say yes to. But I think, as unprofound as that might be, that's really the truth of it. Is it was a decision that I made to take it this far, and now we're in it. There's no turning back.
Yeah, I think, well, excitement for the project, you really was a big motivator for you.
Mhm.
So I started out, I asked you about your frame of mind in the early days. And so let's get your closing thoughts by kind of saying, well, what are you thinking now? What's your current frame of mind?
Moving in this moment, I don't think I've ever been more excited about what we're doing than this year. And it's really weird to say in 2020 because there's a lot going on. There's a lot of really difficult things that are happening throughout our country, in our city, in our country, and throughout the world. And I'm grateful that we've been able to keep working, and actually our team has tripled in size this year with the work that we've done with SBR Advance as we prepare for the phase 2 application. There's another accelerator that we're applying to keep this moving forward, continue working on our relationships. We've this is a light for me, and I hope for the people that are working with me and with the team that we're able to keep all this moving forward, and knowing at the end of the day that the biggest goal we have is that this gets implemented and we can improve water quality. This is a difficult time in many ways, but on the environmental perspective, we're seeing constant regulatory rollbacks that are harming our water quality, and it gives us that much more focus to say we know that we have to make this attractive. We have to prove that we can do it more cost effectively so that we make it very easy to make the decision to protect water quality and public health. And so, amongst everything that's going on in the world right now, that feels really good, to know that we're doing it for the right reasons, and that we have a lot of support, both financially and mentorship, and really being able to look forward in doing stuff. So as stressed out as it can be sometimes, I'm really excited about where we're at right now, and what I'm working on more than anything is letting go a little bit so that we can keep growing, because I have a lot of really great people who are working on this with me, and trusting that our team can carry this all is has been a great exercise for me, not because I don't trust them, but because I have a hard time letting go. I don't think there's a founder in the world who wouldn't say the same thing. But it's that's been really great. And so if the theme of all of this is relationships, building a strong team follows that perfectly.
Well, congratulations on bringing your company and your team to this point. Thanks for being willing to talk to us about your real world experience. I think it's clear that you've been strategic and methodical and tenacious in preparing your tech and your business for commercial success. So your story is inspiring, and we look forward to seeing what comes next from you.
Thank you. And
And
if I could have one parting thought that I've thought of in all this,
sure.
and that is just for anyone who else is thinking about doing this or going through this, that the advice I talked about at the beginning, which was at the end of the day, you kind of have to trust your own instinct. This isn't supposed to feel bad. It's supposed to feel good. It might feel stressful and it might feel scary, but at the end of the day, it's still supposed to feel good. And so if there's relationships or requests or things that don't seem right, there's something in you that allowed you to get to the point of making the decision to start a company or to transfer technology. And so there's more faith that you can have in yourself. Many of us in this position struggle with imposter syndrome. And at the end of the day, if you felt so confident to say yes to this opportunity, you've got something in you that you can trust. And so finding those people that you can trust as well as trusting yourself is a really important component to all this. It doesn't have to be so buzzwordy and pitchy. You know, we're just humans who are trying to make the world better. So I think that has actually been a really great thing for me to reflect on as you'd sent those questions, Brian, and we've been talking through this. So I'm grateful for that and for the chance to share my story in hopes that someone feels inclined to take on this big bear.
Well, I'm glad you brought that trust comment back because I meant to come back and ask you a question about it. So that's good. So before saying goodbye, I want to remind our audience that CTC is a Wisconsin resource to help you navigate the SBIR and STTR funding process. We offer one-on-one counseling, microgrants to aid the proposal writing process, pre-submission reviews, and lean startup programs so you can get 200 customer discovery interviews to help you get your innovative ideas to the market. So thanks again, Paige, and thanks everyone for joining us. And we'll talk to you soon on the next quick chat.